I'm Blythe Thorne, 52, and I built a real estate empire from a single termite-infested fixer-upper while raising my son alone on a diet of instant noodles and sheer grit. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, my hand resting on the cool, polished mahogany banister I had personally selected from a salvage yard in Charleston. The silence of the upper floor was a stark contrast to the cacophony rising from below. I could hear the distinct clinking of crystal flutes and the high-pitched, performative laughter that always accompanies social climbing. My chest tightened. This was my house. Not just a house, but the manor. I had designed every inch of this place, from the hand-laid herringbone floors to the vaulted ceiling that currently trapped the noise of a party I knew nothing about. I took a breath, smoothing the front of my silk blouse. I assumed my son Lucas had forgotten to mention a gathering. He was busy running the logistics arm of the company now, and details often slipped his mind. I took the stairs one by one, the heels of my boots clicking a sharp, authoritative rhythm against the wood. As I descended, the scene in the foyer came into focus. Fresh flowers, peonies, which I am allergic to, were spilling out of vases on the entry table. Caterers I didn't recognize were weaving through the hallway with trays of hors d'oeuvres that looked more like art projects than food. I reached the bottom step and turned toward the dining room. The double doors were thrown wide open. Sunlight streamed in through the floor-to-ceiling windows I had installed to capture the morning light, illuminating a sea of pastel dresses and perfectly coiffed hair. I froze. Sitting at the head of my table in my chair was Margot. Margot, who I had known since we were both waitressing at a diner in our 20s. Next to her was Beatrice, my golf partner. They were laughing, holding glasses of mimosa, completely at ease in my home without me. A surge of confusion washed over me, quickly replaced by a hot prickle of irritation. Why hadn't Margot texted me? I stepped forward, a smile plastered on my face, ready to crash a party that I apparently was supposed to be hosting. "Margot, Beatrice," I called out, my voice projecting over the din. Heads turned. The conversation lulled. But before I could take 3 steps into the room, a figure stepped directly into my path. It was Tinsley, my daughter-in-law. She was wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously bridal for a Sunday brunch. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful, giving her face a severe, angular look. She didn't smile. She stood firmly in the doorway, blocking my view of my friends. "Blythe," she said, her voice dropping an octave, losing the bubbly facade she used for her Instagram stories. "Tinsley," I replied, keeping my tone light but firm. "I didn't realize we were entertaining today. I see Margot is here. I tried to step around her. She sidestepped, mirroring my movement. She physically blocked me from entering my own dining room. My blood ran cold. The air between us seemed to vibrate with sudden tension. I looked down at her. She was shorter than me, but in this moment she felt like a wall of concrete. She leaned in close. The scent of her perfume hit me, something floral, cloying, and sharp like rotting lilies. It made my stomach turn. "What are you doing, Tinsley?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She smiled then, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were dead, cold marbles. "This is an exclusive event, Blythe," she murmured, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's for the new guard, the influencers, the future of this town." My pulse began to thunder in my ears. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. "The new guard," I repeated, incredulous. "Tinsley, Margot is sitting right there. She's 52. This is my house. Those are my friends." Tinsley's smirk deepened. She adjusted the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, a bracelet my son had bought her with the bonus I gave him. "Margot is relevant because she's on the board of the charity we're partnering with," Tinsley hissed. You, well, you're just the landlord. The insult landed like a physical blow to the gut. I opened my mouth to speak, to remind her whose name was on the deed, whose sweat had paid for the roof over her ungrateful head. But she cut me off. She leaned even closer, invading my personal space until her nose was inches from mine. I didn't invite you, Blythe, she said. Every syllable was enunciated with cruel precision. It would be embarrassing for you to be here, she continued, her voice low and venomous. You don't fit the aesthetic. My breath caught in my throat. I stood paralyzed, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity. She didn't invite me to a party in my own dining room with my own friends. Tinsley didn't wait for a response. She spun on her heel, her white dress flaring out, and walked back into the party. She raised her glass to the room, laughing as if she hadn't just stabbed me in the heart. I stood alone in the hallway. The caterers brushed past me, ignoring me completely. I looked at the closed back of my daughter-in-law. My hands curled into fists at my sides. My fingernails dug into my palms until I felt the sting of skin breaking. She thought I was just the landlord. She thought she could dismiss me in the empire I built. The shock began to fade, replaced by a cold, hard rage. If she wanted to treat me like a landlord, I decided right then and there, I would act like one. I turned away from the dining room, my face burning with a humiliation I hadn't felt since my bankruptcy hearing 30 years ago. I walked down the corridor, my legs feeling strangely heavy, like I was wading through deep water. I looked at my hands. They were trembling, not from fear, but from a blinding, white-hot fury that made my vision blur at the edges. I leaned against the wall to steady myself, pressing my cheek against the cool plaster. I closed my eyes and the memory of 6 months ago washed over me. I saw Liam, my son, standing on my porch with tears in his eyes. His tech startup had imploded overnight. Tinsley had been sobbing into a designer handkerchief, looking fragile and broken. "We have nowhere else to go, Mom," he had said, his voice cracking. "Just until we get back on our feet," Tinsley had promised, clutching my arm with desperate fingers. I had opened my door, I had opened my heart. I thought I was being the supportive mother, the safety net I never had when I was their age, raising a child alone. What a fool I was. I opened my eyes and looked down the long hallway that led to the west wing. That's when I truly saw it, really saw it. The subtle erosion of my existence. I looked down at the floor. My antique Tabriz runner, a vibrant silk masterpiece I had won at a fierce auction in London, was gone. In its place lay a rough, beige jute monstrosity that looked like it belonged in a cheap beach rental, not a historic manor. I blinked, looking at the walls. My collection of 19th-century oil landscapes, moody, dark, atmospheric pieces I had spent decades curating, were missing. Bright, abstract splashes of neon canvas now hung in their spots. "It's more open," I could hear Tinsley's voice echoing in my head from weeks ago. More vibe. Why? I felt bile rise in my throat. They had relegated my life's work to the damp basement. They were erasing me. I needed to breathe. I pushed off the wall and walked faster, heading toward the one place where I knew I could find solace. My private library. It was my sanctuary. It was where I kept my business ledgers, the blueprints of my first buildings, and most importantly, the cedar box of letters my late husband wrote to me before he passed. I needed to touch those letters. I needed to remember who I was before this girl decided I was irrelevant. I reached the heavy oak door at the end of the hall. I reached out, my fingers wrapping around the cold brass handle. I turned it. It didn't move. I frowned, twisting it harder. Stuck. I jiggled it, putting my shoulder into the wood. Nothing. It was locked. I reached into my pocket for my master key ring, the one that opened every single door in the Thorne estate. I found the small, jagged brass key and slid it into the lock. It only went halfway in. I stopped. I stared at the keyhole. The metal surrounding the cylinder was shiny. New. My breath hitched in a painful gasp. She hadn't just locked me out. Tinsley had changed the locks on the only room in the house that was purely mine. I stood there in the hallway of the house I built with my own blood and sweat, holding a useless key. A cold realization settled over me, sharper than the rage. This wasn't just a party. This was a coup. I'm Blythe Thorne, 55, and while I built a commercial real estate empire from nothing, I just found myself locked out of my own sanctuary by a girl whose biggest achievement is a viral TikTok dance. I let the useless key drop from my trembling fingers into my pocket. It hit the fabric of my slacks with a heavy, defeated thud. I couldn't breathe in that hallway anymore. The walls, stripped of my art and covered in Tinsley's beige nonsense, felt like they were closing in on me. I needed air. I turned on my heel and marched toward the French doors at the end of the corridor. I pushed them open with enough force to rattle the glass panes. The humid warmth of the garden hit me instantly. The scent of roasting garlic and expensive truffle oil wafted from the catering tents set up on my manicured lawn. I scanned the terrace, my eyes narrowing against the midday sun. There he was, Liam, my son, my only child. He was leaning casually against the stone balustrade I had imported from Italy 10 years ago. He was looking down at his phone, his thumb moving in a rhythmic, hypnotic swipe. A waiter rushed past him carrying a heavy tray of dirty champagne flutes. The server had to swerve dangerously to avoid hitting Liam. Liam didn't even flinch. He didn't move an inch to make space for the staff I was paying for. He acted like a king who couldn't be bothered with the peasants. My stomach twisted into a hard, painful knot. I walked across the stone patio, my heels striking the ground with purposeful fury. I stopped right in front of him. My shadow fell across his screen, blocking out the sun. "Liam," I said. My voice was tight, vibrating with the effort to keep from screaming. He didn't look up. His thumb kept scrolling. Up, up, up. "Liam, look at me," I commanded, sharp and loud. He sighed. It was a long, exaggerated exhale of pure boredom. He slowly slipped the phone into his suit pocket, but his gaze drifted over my shoulder to the rose bushes. "What is it, Mom?" he asked. His voice was flat, dismissive. It was the tone one uses with a nagging child, not the woman who paid off his failed startup's debts. "Tinsley changed the locks on my library," I said, my voice trembling. "She blocked me from the dining room. She humiliated me in front of Margot and Beatrice." I waited for the outrage. I waited for him to straighten up, to apologize, to storm inside and demand his wife treat his mother with respect. Instead, he picked a piece of lint off his lapel. "You're being dramatic, Mom," he said. I blinked, stunned. "Dramatic," I repeated, my voice rising. "I can't get into my own office. My husband's letters are in there." He finally looked me in the eye. There was nothing there, no empathy, no warmth, just a cold, glassy annoyance. "Tinsley needs that space," he said, sounding like he was explaining simple math to a toddler. "She needs a quiet zone to film her content. She's building a brand, Mom. You wouldn't understand the logistics." My mouth fell open. "I run a multi-million-dollar corporation, Liam," I whispered. "I understand logistics." He rolled his eyes. "That's old-world business," he scoffed. "This is digital, it's different." He turned slightly, leaning his back against the stone railing, putting a barrier between us. "Besides," he continued, his voice dropping to a casual, cruel drawl, "why do you need all these rooms? It's just you." I felt the blood drain from my face. My fingertips went numb. "Excuse me," I choked out. "The house," he said, gesturing vaguely at the sprawling estate behind me. "It's too big for a lonely widow. It's wasteful." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My lungs seized. Lonely widow. Is that all I was to him now? Just a ghost haunting the halls of the fortune he was waiting to inherit? I built this house, I said, my voice barely audible. For us, for our family. He let out a short, humorless laugh. And you should be grateful, he said. He looked at me with a chilling condescension. We're filling this mausoleum with life, Mom. We're making it relevant again. You should be thanking Tinsley, not harassing her while she's working. He pulled his phone back out. The conversation was over. I stood there, frozen on the patio. The sun was shining, but I felt freezing cold. The ice in his eyes had pierced right through me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, broken rhythm. He didn't care. My son didn't care. He wasn't just blind to Tinsley's cruelty, he was an active participant. I looked at him one last time, his face illuminated by the blue light of his screen. A strange calm settled over me. It was the calm of a general who realizes diplomacy has failed and war is the only option left. I turned away from him without another word. I walked back toward the house, my stride lengthening. My tears dried up instantly, evaporated by the heat of my resolve. If they thought I was a lonely widow, they were about to learn exactly how I became a tycoon. I reached into my pocket and my hand closed around my phone. I wasn't going to call a locksmith. I was going to call my lawyer. I'm Blythe Thorne, 55, a woman who commands boardrooms and skylines. Yet tonight I found myself peering through my own living room drapes like a frightened prisoner. I watched the red taillights of Liam's sports car disappear down the winding driveway. Silence finally descended on the estate. They were gone. Tinsley had insisted on some trendy fusion restaurant downtown, a place where the portions were microscopic and the wait list was supposedly impossible. I had feigned a migraine to stay behind. My head didn't hurt, but my soul felt bruised. As soon as the iron gates clicked shut at the end of the drive, I pulled my phone from my pocket. My fingers flew across the screen. I didn't call the family handyman. I called the emergency commercial locksmith I used for my high-rise evictions. Get here, I told him, my voice steady despite the thumping of my heart. Now, 20 minutes later, the screech of a drill echoed through the West Wing hallway. I stood behind the locksmith, a burly man named Frank who had worked for me for 15 years. He looked uncomfortable. He kept glancing at the fresh paint on the door frame, then back at me. You sure about this, Ms. Thorne? He asked, the drill bit whining against the metal. This is a high-security residential lock, brand new. Drill it, Frank, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. Destroy it if you have to. He nodded and leaned his weight into the tool. A sharp crack resonated through the wood, metal sheared. The lock gave way with a defeated crunch. Frank stepped back, wiping sawdust from his hands. You're in, he said. I paid him triple his rate in cash and waited for the front door to close behind him before I turned back to the library. My hand hovered over the brass knob. It was warm from the friction of the drill. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale air of the hallway. I pushed the door open. I stepped across the threshold. And I stopped dead. The air left my body in a rush as if I'd been punched in the gut. I blinked, trying to make sense of the visual assault before me. My sanctuary was gone. My massive hand-carved mahogany desk, the one my late husband, Richard, had commissioned for me when I closed my first $1 million deal, was nowhere to be seen. It had anchored this room for 20 years. It was a beast of a desk, dark and imposing, smelling of lemon oil and success. In its place stood a flimsy, white laminate table that looked like it would collapse under the weight of a hardcover book. But there were no books here anymore. I scanned the floor-to-ceiling shelves. My first editions, my leather-bound architectural encyclopedias, my collection of rare maps, they were all gone. The shelves were now lined with props. Cheap, fake succulents in pastel pots. Rows of color-coordinated empty binders that served no purpose other than aesthetics. A ring light on a tripod towered over the desk like a robotic sentry, its eyes staring blankly at me. And there, mounted directly into the rich walnut paneling I had imported from France, was a neon sign. It buzzed with a low, irritating hum. It glowed a garish electric pink. Tinsley's territory. I read the words and I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. My library, my retreat, branded like a cheap nightclub. I walked further into the room, my feet sinking into a plush, white shag rug that had been thrown over my Persian carpet. I felt like an intruder in my own home. "Where is it?" I whispered to the empty room. "Where is my life?" I frantically scanned the corners of the room. My eyes landed on a stack of cardboard boxes shoved haphazardly near the window, half hidden behind a velvet beanbag chair. I rushed over to them. I fell to my knees, not caring that the hard floor bruised my kneecaps. I ripped the top flaps open. My breath hitched. Books. My books were thrown in their spine up, bent and twisted, treated like garbage. I dug deeper, my hands trembling violently. I tossed aside a first edition of The Fountainhead that had its cover torn. I needed to find one thing, the cedar box. "Please," I whimpered, tossing aside a heavy ledger. "Please be safe." I found it at the bottom of the second box. My heart stopped. The lid of the polished cedar box was cracked down the middle. But that wasn't the worst part. A sticky, dark stain had seeped through the cardboard of the box above it and dripped down. It smelled sickly sweet. Cola. Someone had thrown a half-empty soda can into the moving box and it had leaked. I pulled the cedar box out with shaking hands. I opened it. A primal roar built in my throat, a sound so raw I didn't recognize it as my own. Richard's letters. The ink on the top envelope was bleeding. The blue cursive, his beautiful, confident handwriting, was blurred into an illegible smear. I carefully lifted the top letter. The paper was damp. It felt heavy and sodden in my fingers. This was the letter he wrote me the day Liam was born. The letter where he promised to love us both until his last breath. I saw the word forever dissolving into a blue puddle near the corner. I clutched the damp paper to my chest, heedless of the sticky residue ruining my silk blouse. A tear leaked from my eye, hot and angry. I looked up at the pink neon sign buzzing on the wall. Tinsley's territory. She didn't just want my space. She didn't just want my house. She wanted to wipe me out. She treated my most precious memories, the last tangible pieces of the man I loved, like trash to be shoved in a corner. I looked at the ring light. I looked at the white table. I looked at the empty, aesthetic binders. This wasn't ignorance. You don't accidentally throw a soda can into a box of personal mementos. You don't accidentally drill holes into antique paneling. This was dominance. I slowly stood up, still clutching the ruined letter to my heart. The sadness that had been weighing me down for weeks began to evaporate. In its place, a cold, hard steel solidified in my spine. I looked at the reflection of myself in the dark window. I didn't look like a lonely widow anymore. I looked like a predator who had just been woken up. They thought they could bury me in my own basement. They thought they could replace my legacy with a ring light and a hashtag. I realized then that they weren't just guests who had overstayed their welcome. They weren't just family down on their luck. They were parasites. They were burrowing into the host, feeding off my history, my money, and my patience, excreting their beige poison over everything I had built. But parasites make a fatal mistake. They forget that the host can survive the treatment to remove them. I gently placed the damp letter back into the box. I wiped my sticky hands on my pants, not caring about the stain. I walked over to the ring light. I stared at it for a second. Then, with a calm, deliberate motion, I shoved it. It crashed to the floor, the plastic housing shattering with a satisfying crunch. I didn't flinch. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the door wide open. Let them see. Let them see that the lock is broken. Let them see that the beast is out of the cage. I marched down the hall toward my private study, the one room they hadn't touched yet because it was hidden behind the master suite. I sat down at my laptop. I didn't open my photo album. I didn't look at old pictures of Liam as a baby. I opened a blank document. I typed one word in bold, capital letters at the top of the page. Eviction. My fingers hovered over the keys, steady and sure. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was the landlord, and rent was due. I looked at the cursor blinking next to the word eviction, pulsing like a heartbeat. But typing a word on a screen wasn't enough. I needed ammunition. I needed the kind of paperwork that crushes dreams and bankrupts futures, and I knew exactly where it was. It wasn't here in a house compromised by neon signs and sticky soda cans. It was in the one place Tinsley couldn't touch, the vault at Thorne Construction. I closed the laptop with a snap. I grabbed my purse and the keys to my S-Class. I walked back down the hallway, past the desecrated library. I didn't look at the pink light on the floor. I walked out the front door, the broken lock rattling loosely in the frame. I didn't bother fixing it. Let the wind blow in. I got into my car and tore down the driveway, leaving the sleeping parasites behind me. The city at night was my true home. I drove fast, the streetlights blurring into streaks of gold and white. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the underground garage of the Thorne Tower. The security guard, Miller, sat up straight when he saw my car approach. "Ms. Thorne," he stammered, scrambling to open the gate. "Is everything all right? It's midnight." "Everything is becoming clear, Miller," I said, my window rolling up before he could answer. The elevator ride to the 45th floor was silent. When the doors slid open, the smell of the office hit me: coffee, ozone, and ambition. I didn't turn on the main lights. I walked by the glow of the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I entered my corner office and locked the door behind me. I went straight to the wall safe behind the abstract painting I'd bought in Zurich. My fingers punched in the code: Richard's birthday. The heavy steel door swung open with a hiss. I pulled out a thick black accordion folder labeled Estate Planning and Trusts. I carried it to my desk and switched on the single brass banker's lamp. The pool of yellow light illuminated the leather surface of the desk. I sat down and opened the folder. My hands were steady now. I began to dig. I sifted through insurance policies, updated wills, and asset allocations. Then I found it. The Thorne Family Revocable Trust document. I stared at the cover page, and suddenly I was transported back to a sunny Tuesday 6 months ago. I remembered the smell of Liam's cologne, sandalwood, and expensive lies. He had sat across from me in this very office, leaning forward, his eyes wide with faux concern. "It's for tax purposes, Mom," he had said, sliding the papers toward me. "Tinsley and I just want to make sure the estate isn't eaten up by the government if anything happens to you." He had squeezed my hand. "We're just thinking of your legacy," he had whispered. I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat. My legacy. He wasn't protecting my legacy, he was trying to liquidate it. I remembered picking up my Mont Blanc pen that day. I remembered uncapping it. I remembered the tip hovering over the signature line of the final deed transfer. But something had stopped me. A cold shiver, a whisper from the universe, or maybe Richard's ghost gripping my wrist. I had told Liam, "I need my legal team to review the final clause on the land rights again. Leave it with me." He had been annoyed. I saw the flicker of irritation in his eyes before he masked it with a smile. Okay, Mom, just don't wait too long. I looked down at the paper on my desk now. I flipped to the very last page of the grant deed. I held my breath. I brought the magnifying glass from my drawer up to the paper, though I didn't need it. The signature line for grantor, Blythe Thorne, was stark, beautifully, wonderfully blank. I let out a laugh that sounded jagged in the empty room. I hadn't signed it. I had thrown it in the safe to review later, and then life got busy and I simply forgot. And because I controlled the filing clerks, no one had dared to follow up with me. I flipped through the rest of the documents. The title was still in my name. The land was in my name. Every single brick, every beam, every blade of grass at the estate belonged solely, 100% to me. Liam and Tinsley had been operating under the assumption that the paperwork was a formality, that the transfer was done because I usually did what Liam asked. They thought they owned the house. They thought they were the masters of the manor, waiting for the old woman to die off so they could renovate in peace. But they were just squatters. Squatters with a ring light. I looked at the clock on the wall. 3:12 a.m. I didn't care. I pulled my phone out and dialed Arthur Sterling, the head of my legal retention team. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice groggy and thick with sleep. Blythe, he rasped. Is there an emergency? Is the building on fire? No, Arthur, I said, leaning back in my leather chair, my voice like forged steel. The building stands, but I am about to burn something else to the ground. I heard the rustle of sheets as he sat up. What do you need? I'm looking at the deed for the Thorne estate, I said, running my finger over the blank signature line. It was never transferred to the trust. I am the sole owner. Yes, Arthur said, his voice clearing up. I remember you holding that back. We never filed the change. Good, I said. I want you to draft an eviction notice. An eviction notice? Arthur paused. For whom? You have staff living on site. For family, I said. The silence on the other end was heavy. Blythe, Arthur said cautiously. Evicting a child, that's a nuclear option. In the state of New York, given they've established residency, it could be a 30-day process. It gets messy. I don't care about messy, Arthur, I snapped. I care about ownership. I want them out, and I don't want to wait 30 days for a sheriff. I want you to find every loophole, every clause, and every pressure point we have. I looked at the file again. Wait, I said, my eyes catching a paragraph in the original occupancy agreement I had made Liam sign when he first moved back in to get back on his feet 3 years ago. It was a standard clause I used for my commercial tenants, something I had included out of habit. Clause 4B, tenancy at will. Revocable immediately upon destruction of property or unauthorized alteration of structural elements. My eyes widened. Arthur, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Do we still have the destruction of property clause in the standard family occupancy rider? We do, Arthur confirmed. Why? Because, I said, thinking of the drill holes in my walnut paneling, thinking of the cracked cedar box. They didn't just decorate, they damaged the structure. If they damaged the structure, Arthur said, his lawyer brain fully awake now, that's a breach of the conditional license to occupy. We can file for an immediate restraining order to prevent further damage and remove them from the premises to preserve the asset. A cold smile spread across my face. Preserve the asset, I repeated. I like the sound of that. I can have the papers ready by 8:00 a.m., Arthur said. I'll have a process server meet you at the gate. Make it 7:00 a.m., I commanded. And Arthur, yes, Blythe, draft a secondary document for me. What is it? I want to dissolve the trust entirely, I said. Liam gets nothing, not the house, not the stocks, not the insurance. Blythe, that's effectively disinheriting him. He disinherited himself when he let his wife treat my memories like trash, I said. Do it. I hung up the phone. I stared out the window at the city I helped build. I wasn't crying anymore. The grief was gone, replaced by the clarity of a demolition expert surveying a condemned building. I picked up the unsigned deed. I ripped it in half. The sound of the tearing paper was the sweetest music I had heard in years. I ripped it again and again until the lie of their ownership was nothing but confetti on my desk. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the first hint of gray light touch the horizon. The sun was coming up. And for Liam and Tinsley, it was going to be a very, very bad morning. I'm Blythe Thorne, 58 years old, and I am the CEO of a construction empire that has reshaped the Manhattan skyline. But for the last 72 hours, I have been playing the role of a frightened mouse. Arthur had called me back while I was driving home from the office that morning. The judge is out until Thursday, he had warned, his voice crackling over the Bluetooth in my S-Class. If we want the ex parte emergency order for immediate removal based on property destruction, we need to wait for Judge Holloway. He's the only one who respects property law enough to sign this without a hearing. Can you hold out for 3 days? I can hold out, Arthur, I had said, my eyes fixed on the road. I've negotiated with union leaders and hostile board members. I can handle a 24-year-old influencer. Sit tight, he said. Don't tip your hand. If they know you're evicting them, they might do more damage before the sheriff arrives. So I went home. I parked my car. I walked into the house that was legally mine and I put on a mask. For 3 agonizing days, I became the submissive houseguest in my own kingdom. It was the hardest performance of my life. On the first morning, I walked into the breakfast nook wearing my favorite vintage Armani silk blouse. It was timeless, elegant, and worth more than Tinsley's entire wardrobe. Tinsley was sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone, wearing a neon oversized hoodie that looked like it had been attacked by a pair of scissors. She looked up, her nose wrinkling as if she smelled something spoiled. "Oh wow," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "Going for the librarian chic look today, Blythe. It's very vintage and not in the Depop way." Liam snorted into his coffee, my own son. He didn't even look at me. "It's comfortable," I said softly, staring at my hands. "It makes you look washed out," Tinsley said, turning back to her phone. "You should let me style you. We could do a glow up for my Boomer Mill video. It would get huge views." My blood boiled so hot I thought it might melt my contact lenses. "Maybe later," I whispered. I walked away. I went to the library, or what was left of it, and sat in the dark. I breathed in and out. 2 more days, I told myself. Just 2 more days. On the second day, the humiliation escalated. I came downstairs to find the kitchen transformed into a production set. There were 3 ring lights standing like sentinels around the marble island, the island I had imported from a quarry in Carrara. Tinsley was standing in the center, holding a spatula she had never used for cooking in her life. She was talking to her phone, which was mounted on a tripod. "Hey guys," she chirped, her voice pitching up an octave. "Welcome back to the Reno journey." So I wanted to talk about how we transformed this tired, dusty old mansion into a modern masterpiece. I froze in the doorway, tired, dusty. She swept her hand around the room. "When Liam and I took over, this place was basically a mausoleum," she lied, beaming at the camera lens. "It was so dark and depressing, but with a little vision and a lot of white paint, we're finally making it a home." She hadn't paid for a single can of paint. She hadn't sanded a single floorboard. She was claiming my life's work, my aesthetic, and my financing as her own vision. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a sharp constriction of my heart muscle. She saw me standing there. She didn't stop recording. She just made a shooing motion with her hand, flapping her manicured fingers at me to get out of the frame. I backed away. I retreated to the shadows. I let her have her moment, because I knew that video would be excellent evidence in court. The third day today was the breaking point. The atmosphere in the house was suffocating. I woke up with a headache that throbbed behind my eyes. I put on my silk robe, the heavy navy one that made me feel armored, and walked downstairs. I just wanted a cup of Earl Grey. I needed the warmth, the bergamot, the routine. I walked toward the kettle. Excuse me?" Tinsley's voice cut through the air like a whip. I turned. She was sitting on the counter, feet on my marble, applying false eyelashes in a handheld mirror. Liam was adjusting a light reflector nearby. "The kitchen is a closed set right now," Tinsley said, not even looking at me. "The lighting is perfect and we're about to shoot the morning routine segment. You'll mess up the background." "I just want a cup of tea, Tinsley," I said, my voice steady. "And I want a viral hit," she snapped, finally looking at me with cold, dead eyes. "Go use the bathroom tap upstairs if you're thirsty. We're working." Liam looked at me looking pained. "Mom, just give us an hour, okay?" he mumbled. I looked at them. I looked at the disrespect radiating off them like heat waves. They thought I was beat. They thought I was just the old woman who paid the bills and got in the way of their content. A strange calm washed over me. It was the calm of a demolition expert pressing the button. "Of course," I said. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a jagged, secret thing that didn't reach my eyes. "I wouldn't want to interrupt your work." I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I didn't go upstairs. I walked to the front foyer. I checked the pocket of my robe. The heavy envelope was there. Arthur had delivered it via courier an hour ago, meeting me at the back garden gate while Tinsley was busy doing her makeup. The ink was fresh. The judge's signature was stamped in heavy black. The sheriff was 5 minutes away. I walked to the front window and pulled back the curtain. I saw the black SUV turn the corner. I saw the uniformed officer step out. I tightened the belt of my robe. I wasn't the submissive houseguest anymore. I was the landlord, and rent was due. I'm Blythe Thorne, 58 years old, and I own the largest commercial development firm on the East Coast, yet I am currently hiding in my own master bedroom while 100 strangers desecrate my downstairs foyer. The bass from the DJ booth downstairs was so heavy it rattled the crystal perfume bottles on my vanity. Boom, boom, boom. It felt like a physical assault on the house itself. I checked my reflection in the mirror one last time. I wasn't wearing the vintage Armani blouse or the submissive navy robe tonight. I was wearing a sharp, black Alexander McQueen suit with a structured blazer that looked like armor and stilettos sharp enough to puncture a lung. I looked like a CEO. I looked like an executioner. I grabbed the manila envelope from my desk, feeling the weight of the court order inside it. I opened my bedroom door and the noise hit me like a physical wave. Shouting, laughter, the clinking of glass. I walked to the top of the landing, staying just out of the light, hovering in the shadows of the third-floor balustrade. Below me, my home had been turned into a nightclub. There were people everywhere, kids barely out of college, influencers holding ring lights, hangers on drinking cheap champagne out of my crystal flutes. Someone had spilled something red on the beige runner in the hallway. I didn't flinch. It didn't matter anymore. The cleaning crew would be here tomorrow after the locks were changed. I waited. I watched Liam weaving through the crowd, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres like a servant in his own inheritance. He looked exhausted. Good. Then the music cut out. A spotlight swept across the room and landed on the grand staircase. The double helix marble staircase I had designed myself 30 years ago. Tinsley stepped into the light. She was wearing a silver sequined dress that caught every flashbulb in the room. She held a microphone, beaming down at the sea of faces like she was royalty addressing her subjects. "Hi everyone," she screamed, her voice shrill and amplified by the speakers. The crowd roared. "Thank you so much for coming to Housewarming Part 2, she cheered, throwing her arms wide. "We hit 1 million followers today, you guys, 1 million, more cheering. I gripped the railing, my knuckles turning white. "It's been such a crazy journey," Tinsley said, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. "Building this life, building this home. It took so much hard work. People think it's easy being a creator, but Liam and I built this from the ground up. We turned this place into a sanctuary. We made it ours." A lie. A disgusting public lie broadcast to 1 million people. "I'm just so proud of what we've achieved," she continued, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "It proves that if you manifest it, and if you work hard enough, you can have it all. This is my dream house, and now it's my reality." That was my cue. I didn't run, I didn't shout. I simply stepped out of the shadows and began to descend the stairs. Clack, clack, clack. The rhythmic sound of my heels on the marble cut through the silence as the crowd noticed movement behind Tinsley. Heads turned. Phones pivoted. The spotlight operator, confused, widened the beam to include me. I walked straight down the center of the staircase, my eyes locked on the back of Tinsley's head. The crowd went dead silent. The tension in the room sucked the air out of the foyer. Tinsley noticed the shift in the audience's gaze. She turned around, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she plastered it back on. She saw me. She saw the suit. She saw the envelope in my hand. But she was a performer to the bitter end. She laughed, a nervous, tinkling sound that echoed awkwardly in the quiet hall. She brought the microphone back to her lips, pivoting to face the crowd while gesturing loosely at me. "Oh, look, guys," she giggled, rolling her eyes playfully. "Grandma's finally awake. I think she might have had a little too much sherry before her nap." A few people chuckled nervously. Liam froze at the bottom of the stairs, his face draining of color. "Blythe," Tinsley said, her voice dropping to a patronizing coo, though the microphone picked up every syllable. "Why don't you go back to bed? We're celebrating right now. You're ruining the vibe." I didn't stop walking until I was 3 steps above her. I towered over her. My shadow fell across her sequined dress, extinguishing her sparkle. I looked out at the sea of phones recording us. I looked at the influencers live streaming to their followers. Perfect. I wanted witnesses. "I'm not tired, Tinsley," I said, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone, trained by years of commanding boardrooms. I reached out and plucked the microphone from her hand. She was too stunned to resist. I held it to my lips. "And I don't drink sherry," I said, my voice booming through the house I built. "I drink champagne, which I will be doing immediately after you leave." Tinsley's jaw dropped. "Excuse me," she hissed, stepping closer, trying to grab the mic back. "What are you doing? You're embarrassing me." "No," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "I'm evicting you. I'm Blythe Thorne, 58 years old, and I own the largest commercial development firm on the East Coast. Yet I am currently standing on my own staircase holding a legal grenade that is about to destroy my daughter-in-law's viral moment." I reached into the inner pocket of my structured blazer. My fingers brushed against the cool, crisp paper of the envelope. I pulled it out slowly. I moved with deliberate, agonizing slowness because I knew exactly how the camera worked. I wanted every lens in the room to focus on my hand. I held the envelope up. I angled it so the harsh light from the influencers' ring lights caught the heavy, embossed seal of my attorney's firm. The room was dead silent. I could hear the hum of the HVAC system and the nervous shuffling of feet on my hardwood floors. I brought the microphone closer to my lips. "You told these people you built this house," I said, my voice projecting with the cool iron authority I used to command boardrooms full of skeptical investors. I looked down at Tinsley. She was staring at the envelope, her brow furrowed in confusion. "You told them you financed it," I continued, my eyes sweeping over the crowd of strangers drinking my liquor. "You claimed my life's work as your own vision." I took a step down. I was now on the same step as her. I was close enough to smell her cloying vanilla perfume and the fear rising off her skin. But since I wasn't invited to the party in the house I built, I said, my voice dropping an octave, deadly and final, "it's time for the host to leave." Tinsley's smirk faltered. It twitched at the corner of her mouth, a glitch in her perfectly curated persona. She looked at the crowd, then back at me, trying to gauge if this was a skit. She reached out and snatched the envelope from my hand. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, trying to sound bored, trying to play it off for the live stream. "What is this, a birthday card?" She ripped the flap open. I watched her closely. I watched her eyes scan the document inside. I saw the exact moment the words hit her brain. "Notice to quit. Eviction proceedings." Plaintiff Blythe Thorne. The blood drained from her face so fast it looked like a magic trick. Her perfectly contoured cheeks turned the color of ash. Her hands started to shake. The paper rattled loudly against the sequins of her dress, the sound amplified by the silence of the room. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, the whites showing all around the irises. The arrogance was gone. The smugness that had plagued me for 3 years evaporated instantly. "Liam," she squeaked, her voice cracking. She turned to look at my son. Liam was standing at the foot of the stairs, pale and sweating. He didn't step forward. He didn't rush to save her. He looked at the floor, unable to meet her gaze, defeated by the reality I had finally forced him to face. I didn't look at Liam. I stayed focused on her. I wanted this moment etched into her memory forever. I leaned into the microphone one last time. "You have 30 days to remove your boxes, Tinsley," I said, ensuring the live stream caught every syllable. I saw a few phones in the crowd zoom in on her shaking hands. "But you don't have 30 days to stay here." I checked the diamond watch on my wrist. "The sheriff is outside," I announced to the room. "And the locksmith is with him." Tinsley gasped, a wet, ugly sound. "I am having the locks changed tonight," I finished. I dropped the microphone. It hit the marble step with a deafening thud that echoed like a gavel strike. I didn't wait for a response. I turned my back on her. I walked back up the stairs, my heels clicking a rhythm of absolute victory. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from the rush of reclaiming my territory. I had taken back my home. I had taken back my narrative, and I didn't even have to break a sweat. I'm Blythe Thorne, 58 years old, and despite being named the toughest CEO in the tri-state area by Forbes, nothing prepared me for the sheer, intoxicating satisfaction of watching my ungrateful son's house of cards collapse in real time. The silence that followed the microphone hitting the floor was heavy, suffocating, and absolutely delicious. I stood at the top of the stairs, my chest heaving slightly, not from exertion, but from the adrenaline flooding my system. Below me, the party had mutated. It was no longer a celebration, it was a crime scene, and every guest holding a smartphone was now a witness for the prosecution. The influencers who had been fawning over Tinsley moments ago were now whispering behind their hands, their eyes darting between the sobbing hostess and the imposing woman in the suit. I saw the shift happen instantly. They smelled blood in the water. I watched as live streams were not cut but zoomed in. The housewarming part 2 had just become the eviction party, and I was the headliner. Liam finally snapped out of his paralysis. The color rushed back into his face, turning his skin a blotchy, violent red. He took the stairs 2 at a time, charging toward me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred that I had never seen on his face before. "You're a monster," he screamed, his voice cracking under the strain. He stopped 3 steps below me, his hands balled into fists at his sides. Spit flew from his lips, landing on the polished marble I had paid to have imported from Italy. "How could you do this?" He bellowed, oblivious to the hundreds of eyes watching his meltdown. "You planned this, you let us throw this party just to humiliate us." I looked down at him, my expression as immovable as a cliff face. I didn't feel the sting of his words. I felt the armor I had forged over 30 years of business tighten around me. "I didn't invite anyone, Liam," I said, my voice low and steady, contrasting sharply with his hysteria. "Remember, I wasn't on the guest list." He opened his mouth to shout again, to hurl more insults, to call me every name he could think of to hurt me, but I didn't give him the chance. I reached into my blazer pocket one more time. I pulled out the second envelope. It was thinner than the eviction notice, but just as heavy in consequence. "Since we are discussing finances," I said, extending the crisp white paper toward him. He stared at it, his chest heaving. "What is this?" he snarled. "Consider it a parting gift," I replied coldly. "It's the bill." He snatched it from my hand, tearing the top off with trembling fingers. "For the damages," I clarified, watching his eyes scan the itemized list. "Specifically, the restoration costs for the antique mahogany shelving in the library you decided to paint white for a modern farmhouse aesthetic. And the replacement value of the 3 first edition novels Tinsley ruined because she doesn't believe in coasters." Liam's face went slack. The paper crinkled in his grip. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw the fear behind the anger. He realized I wasn't just kicking them out, I was holding them accountable. "Blythe, please," the wail came from the bottom of the stairs. I shifted my gaze past my son to the woman crumpled on the floor. Tinsley had collapsed. It wasn't a graceful, cinematic faint. It was a messy, ugly breakdown. She was sobbing, her chest heaving in jagged gasps, her hands clutching the hem of her sequin dress. Her mascara, which she always claimed was waterproof, was streaming down her cheeks in black, oily rivers. She looked up at me, her face blotchy and distorted. "You can't do this," she choked out, a bubble of snot forming at her nose. "Think about our reputation. We have sponsors here. We have brand deals. If you do this, we lose everything." She reached a hand out toward me, begging. "Please, Blythe. Just give us a week. Just let us spin this." I felt a cold sneer curl my lip. "Reputation," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a bad smell. I took one step down, leaning over the railing so she could hear me clearly over the murmurs of the crowd. "You want me to think about your reputation?" I gestured to the grand front doors, the ones she had barred me from. "Did you think about my reputation when you told the world I was senile?" I asked, my voice cutting. She flinched. "Did you think about family when you changed the locks on a house you didn't pay for?" She sobbed harder, burying her face in her hands. "Did you think about me at all when you threw my letters, my attempts to reach out to fix this into the corner like garbage?" I straightened up, smoothing the lapels of my blazer. "You wanted a narrative, Tinsley," I said, turning my back on her. "Now you have one." The rest of the night was a blur of flashing blue lights and dispersing crowds. The sheriff arrived 10 minutes later to oversee the dispersal of the party. I stood in the library, running my hand over the ruined paint, listening to the sounds of the house emptying out. I heard Tinsley screaming into her phone in the driveway. I heard Liam throwing luggage into his car. And then silence. Real, profound silence. I didn't sleep. I sat in the wingback chair by the front window, watching the sky turn from black to a bruised purple, and finally to a brilliant, fiery orange. I held a cup of black coffee, the porcelain warm against my palms. At 6:00 a.m. sharp, the rumble of a heavy diesel engine vibrated through the floorboards. I looked out the window. A massive white moving truck was backing into the driveway, its backup alarm beeping a steady, rhythmic countdown. The for sale sign was already in the back of my car, ready to be planted in the lawn. I took a sip of coffee and watched the truck's air brakes hiss. It was a sight more beautiful than any sunrise I had ever seen. I'm Blythe Thorne, 58 years old, founder of Thorne Logistics. And tonight I learned that the only thing sweeter than closing a multi-million-dollar deal is watching the people who tried to break you finally realize they are the ones made of glass. The last of the luxury SUVs peeled out of my driveway, kicking up gravel in a desperate haste to escape the blast zone. I stood on the front porch, the cool night air hitting my skin, drying the thin sheen of sweat that had coated my back during the confrontation. My heart was slowly decelerating from its frantic gallop, settling into a steady, powerful rhythm. Inside, the house was finally blessed silent. The sheriff, a man I had known since high school, touched the brim of his hat as he walked past me. "All clear, Ms. Thorne," he said, his voice low and respectful. "Deputies will do one more sweep of the grounds to make sure no stragglers are hiding in the pool house." I nodded, gripping the railing. "Thank you, Jim," I said. "Send the bill to the office." He chuckled darkly. "No charge for keeping the peace, Blythe, just try to have a quiet night." I turned back to the open doorway. The locksmith was already there. The sound of his drill biting into the metal of the front door was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. It was a harsh, grinding screech, violent and absolute. He was coring out the smart lock Tinsley had installed, some ridiculous biometric thing that required a fingerprint I didn't have. I watched the metal shavings fall onto the marble threshold like gold dust. "I want deadbolts," I told the locksmith, my voice echoing in the cavernous, empty hall. "Old school, heavy brass, the kind you need a physical key to turn." He looked up, safety goggles over his eyes. "You got it, ma'am." "Nothing's getting through these tonight." I stepped inside, my heels crunching on a rogue plastic champagne flute someone had dropped in their panic. The foyer was a disaster. Tinsley's aesthetic was everywhere, cheap neon signs that said vibes and good times leaned against my wainscoting, pink balloons bobbed listlessly against the vaulted ceiling, and spilled mixers made the floor sticky. But the people were gone. The parasites had been fumigated. I walked into the living room, stepping over a discarded ring light. My eyes landed on the corner where my grandfather clock used to stand. Tinsley had moved it to the garage because she said the ticking ruined the audio for her stories. I felt a surge of irrational, possessive energy. I walked straight to the garage door, unlocked it, and threw it open. There it was. My great-grandfather's 19th-century mahogany floor clock, draped in a dusty painter's drop cloth like a corpse. I pulled the cloth off, coughing as dust motes danced in the harsh fluorescent light. It was heavy, solid wood, weighing nearly 100 pounds. I didn't care. I grabbed the sides, my manicured nails digging into the wood. I gritted my teeth and pulled. It scraped against the concrete, a heavy, protesting groan. I hauled it over the threshold, my biceps burning, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. I didn't call for help. I didn't wait for the movers. I needed to do this. I dragged it inch by inch across the hallway, the wood screeching against the marble, leaving a faint scratch that I would cherish forever as a battle scar. I shoved it back into its rightful alcove. I reached inside the glass panel and swung the pendulum. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The heartbeat of my home had returned. I went to the wet bar in the study. My hands were trembling slightly now, the adrenaline crash finally hitting me. I bypassed the trendy seltzers Tinsley had stocked and reached to the very back of the top shelf. Behind a false panel, I knew she was too short to reach. I pulled out the bottle of Macallan 25 I had been saving for my retirement. I poured 3 fingers into a crystal tumbler. I didn't add ice. I wanted the burn. I walked back out to the front porch and sat on the wicker swing, the only piece of furniture Tinsley hadn't managed to replace with modern acrylic garbage. I took a sip of the scotch. It tasted like smoke and oak, an absolute victory. I stared down the long, winding driveway. At the very end, near the main road, I saw red brake lights flare. It was Liam's Range Rover. It was idling at the gate. I knew he was looking in the rearview mirror. I knew he was waiting for me to run down the driveway, waving my arms, begging him to come back, promising to fix everything if he just forgave me. That's what I had done for 30 years. Every time he faltered, I was the safety net. Every time he broke something, I was the glue. Every time he screamed, I was the silence that absorbed it. I took another sip of scotch and leaned my head back against the cushion. I didn't move. I didn't wave. I simply watched. After a long minute, the brake lights dimmed as he took his foot off the pedal. The car accelerated, turning left onto the main road and vanished into the darkness. He chose his side. He chose the woman who mocked me over the mother who built the world he lived in. And for the first time in my life, I chose my dignity. A profound sense of loneliness washed over me, but it wasn't the sharp, panic-inducing loneliness I had feared. It was cold, clean, and spacious. It was the feeling of standing on a mountaintop where the air is thin but the view is limitless. I had my house. I had my company. I had my name. And tomorrow, at 8:00 a.m. sharp, I had a team of high-end decorators arriving with a dumpster. I was going to strip the neon from the walls. I was going to peel up the vinyl flooring Tinsley had laid over my hardwoods. I was going to burn the white slipcovers. I was going to restore the soul of this place, room by room, board by board. I swirled the amber liquid in my glass, watching the moonlight catch the crystal. They say you can't choose your family, but that's a lie weak people tell themselves to tolerate abuse. You can choose who has access to you. You can choose who gets a seat at your table. And you can certainly choose who holds the keys to your front door. I am Blythe Thorne, I am 58, and I have finally learned that a home is only a sanctuary if you refuse to let vipers nest in the walls. I closed my eyes and listened to the grandfather clock ticking in the foyer, counting down the seconds of the rest of my life. It was the sound of my own time finally returned to me.